Okay, good evening, councillors, members of the public, everybody else, officers. Welcome to this evening's Scrutiny Committee meeting. I'm Councillor Osborne, I'm the chairman. I've got a bit of paperwork or a bit of technicalities to go through first. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phone or electronic device on silent if they have one near them. Checking my own, yes. Do not place papers or electronic devices between themselves and the microphones. Please, with remote participants, mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise. As yet, we don't have any, but Joe is joining us later. Members of the council joining us remotely should leave cameras on. After each item has been presented, I'll invite members present in the room to ask questions first. Those joining remotely will be invited to speak and should indicate their wish to do so by using the raise your hand facility. Only those members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee present in the room will be making the decisions. I will confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching on the webcast. Agenda item 1, minutes. Do I have your authorisation to sign the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 29th of September 2022 as a correct record of the proceedings? Thank you. Item 2, apologies and substitution. Looks like we've got a full house. Good. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosures of interest. Anybody have any disclosure of interest they feel they may need to make? Councillor Maynard, you?
Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 6.
Okay. Anyone else on County Council? No. No.
Can I seek guidance? I am the Vice Chairman of a trust which manages one of these facilities it's a community hall out of school hours. Should I declare that? In which case I am the Vice Chairman of the Etchingham Trust for Sport and Recreation. It's personal, not prejudicial.
Okay, item 5. Robert Health, Wellbeing and Leisure Facilities Strategy. As I think as you alluded to there, we at the last meeting on the 22nd of September, we had a slightly confusing bit in trying to set up a task and finish group, if you'll remember, with regard to health and wellbeing strategy. And we were sort of come from both sides by 2 cabinet members, telling us that they was already doing the work, if you'll remember. I spoke to Joe at our briefing last Tuesday, and he said, well, I think that there's confusion there in the name of this leisure facility strategy, in putting in Rother Health, Wellbeing and Leisure Facility. And we've sort of mentioned or come up with, I think there was an email out that said, should be Rother Health and Wellbeing Leisure Facility Strategy. So it's a separate, so it's part of health and well-being, but it's separate, if you know what I mean. The health and, you look confused, Councillor. Health and well-being is a massive thing that involves the NHS, the statutory people and everybody else. I see Councillor Timpey wants to speak. So that's where, you know, this is a leisure facility strategy. And if you're healthy and fit, then you're part of the leisure. It's part of it, but it's not. If you know what I mean, Councillor Timpey, I'll bring you into.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think if we just simply put health and well-being, leisure strategy, it's just part of the bigger umbrella. And that's what's missing, and that's what I did ask for. So
that's basically what I was trying to say.
But before we progress beyond that point, I don't know how you're going to catch this, but health and well-being, you're absolutely right, and I think this is a step in the right direction. But this is essentially a strategy about physical activity. Leisure itself goes way beyond physical activity. At the University of the Old Age, for example, is an important component of leisure, and indeed mental well-being is at least as important as physical well-being. I think I'm happy with the retitling, but not with the implication that leisure is limited to physical activity. And I think we need somehow to catch that in the text.
Yeah, okay. We have Rachel found here, who's I assume has written a report. But what I will do before we start on that, obviously there's members of the public here, which we never get members of the public at our scrutiny meetings. So there must be a reason, and I would assume that would be with regard to the Rye swimming pool and the potential closure. The awkward thing is that is not necessarily an agenda item, but it almost seems that by coming up with a leisure and fitness strategy or a leisure facilities strategy, before we've even discussed it, we've sort of crashed a bus through it almost by announcing the closure of the Rye swimming pool. Now, many of you may know I've been on this council for some time, and back in, I think, 2001, maybe year 2000 or 2001, I actually chaired the committee that chose the contractor to build it. So I know about it, if you know what I mean. Councillor Coleman, Councillor Stevens, did you wish to...
thank you, Chair. I just want to say a few things. I mean, one, there's been no consultation about this closing of Rye swimming pool. I think that everybody doesn't know how important it is. There's the schools go there learning to swim. We had deaths in Canberra a few years ago. I also witnessed training of lifeguards when I went there the weekend. I mean, there's been jobs lost, and it does help with mental health issues after COVID. I mean, I think that we need to look into this further and maybe get together with Freedom Leisure and my town council and have a proper consultation, not just shut it. I mean, Rye gets the snippets of everything. Why Rye? Why Rye's one? All right, it's not used as much as Bexhill. Maybe because the population is lower. Anyway, that's my point, and I'd like to have a consultation about it properly with Freedom Leisure. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Maynard, do you wish to...
Thank you for... Is it that one?
No, it's that one.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And I just want to echo the comments that Councillor Stevens has made, but also I think that quite clearly one understands in the financial climate that the Council finds itself in, it's sometimes necessary to make difficult decisions, but those decisions need to be transparent decisions, and it is right and proper that all members of the Council, not simply some or all the executive, make those decisions and proper processes seem to be done when those decisions are made. So it thus follows that this hasn't been to Cabinet for a debate. It hasn't been to scrutiny for a debate. It's not been examined by all members of the authority, just simply by some or all of the executive. So my plea, whilst we're somewhat in advance of discussing the work programme. I fully understand, and members of all political persuasions will understand, just from looking at social media in Rye, just what a serious issue this is, not just for the people in Rye, but the surrounding villages. And I think it's high time that we were seen to be totally transparent in this matter. So quite clearly, I would obviously echo the comments that Councillor Stevens has made, but go a little further than that and suggest at the next possible opportunity, i.e. at the next Scrutiny Committee meeting, that we invite Freedom Leisure to come along. That clearly it's up to you as Chairman whether you wish to extend that invite to a delegation from Rye Town Council. But it is, in order to us to fully understand the decision that has been made, it is surely of interest to all members to actually hear what Freedom Leisure have got to say from their side of the perspective, and indeed this executive of this authority in coming to that decision, that we are seen to debate the decision that has apparently been made. And I have to say, again, I will say that one doesn't like to make political decisions at a scrutiny, political comments at a scrutiny committee, but this is a decision that has apparently been made without consultation, without having a proper debate of all members of this authority, whatever party they do or do not represent. So I would suggest, and I hope that I have a second of a suggestion, that we formally invite Freedom Leisure to a meeting of this committee, because I think it is the Scrutiny Committee that should have the opportunity to properly question those members of Freedom Leisure in a friendly and constructive manner, because that's the way we gather evidence. And obviously it would be appropriate for Cabinet members, and indeed if you'll extend that invitation to Rye Town Council, so that we can then properly discuss the matter, so that it's not a decision that is simply made by executive members and officers behind closed doors, that it is properly debated in a transparent fashion, so that the residents of Rye and the surrounding areas not only understand the decision, but that suggestions can be made to mitigate the situation. Thank you, Chairman.
I was even going to second it myself, as my patch surrounds Rye. This is Rye and District Pool after all, so I represent Canberra, Ryden, Blaydon, Peasmarsh, and Chelsea Beach, just about everywhere else that's not Rye, I think. Did you have comment to make, yes. Councillor Williams?
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. I was actually at the opening of Rye Swimming Pool, and it's a lovely swimming pool. I would hate to lose the one in Bexhill, but it's a much nicer pool than Bexhill, and the facilities are really, really spot on. And I think it's just appalling to just decide to close something without, as Councillor Maynard has said, without any discussion. And I think the people of Rye don't have that much in the way of leisure facilities. Well, they do with bowls and things, but I mean for the younger people. And so I would support it coming back to scrutiny. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. I would have seconded that, but I will third or fourth or fifth that instead, if only for the sort of thing. I think, we can't be looking at pools in Bexhill and improving or building new pools in Bexhill, etc., if we're then going to close a pool down in Rye. I think if it can't be run for profit, then I think we need to look at whether it can be run for public good instead. And I definitely think Freedom Leisure need to come here and sort of talk us through their decision, so that we can make sure that if that is a decision that needs to be made, it's the right one. I personally don't think it is, although times are tough, and that funding, both in local government and in sort of leisure generally and for businesses, is very much needed. And anyone here with the ear of anyone in government at the moment could do well to call on that government to actually provide some funding for leisure facilities, because this is a common story across the country. Thank you.
I think what we do, if we move on from this, because as I said, it's not strictly an agenda item of the pool itself, but I think we're in agreement that we get it onto the work programme, which we've got to discuss later, so we can move that. If we're happy, if you're happy now to vote on this to say get it on the work programme. Yeah, go on, Charlie.
As a young man, I lived in Rye, and Rye is a lovely town. But I think the thing about swimming is you can be 8 or 80, you can swim. It's something for all generations. And I do know that part of recovery from people who suffer from depression or mental health, doctors often say to them, take up swimming because it's so good for you. And also, when I worked for adult social care, we used to take disability groups swimming as well. And so to lose this facility would have a massive effect on all generations and people in Rye. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think when it was designed, it's got a long slope or something so you can get wheelchairs and everything into it. There was a lot of thought put into the design of it. I think, if you've got your hands up, you might as well speak. Councillor Barnes.
Normally, the Cabinet would have this decision in front of them, and you, as chairman, or any two members of this committee, could call it in for review. I just wonder why the truncated procedure without consultation, without it going to Cabinet, and who has the power to do that? Because effectively they are bypassing the call-in procedure.
I haven't got the power to do it, but I don't know. I'll have to. Can I pick that up with the chief executive tomorrow?
Better pick that up with the chief executive tomorrow. Because it is very. When my email come late last Wednesday, I think Wednesday or Thursday morning. So, Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. As a Bexhill member, I fully support what various other members of this committee have said. I think it'll be a disaster for residents in Rye and Eastern Rother to close this pool. And yes, I do appreciate the financial constraints. What the question I'd like to ask is, were Cabinet members involved in the decision, or was it simply made by officers?
I think Councillor Timpey, as the Cabinet member, would be able to answer that one. Put you in the firing line, Hazel.
I think we need to be clear that this is a decision by Freedom Leisure, and they're making this decision all over the country. I spoke with the managing director today, who was in Stafford, having to make some difficult decisions about redundancies. So this is not unique to us. We haven't been singled out. And Freedom Leisure are in trouble. And they have gone to Hastings, they have gone to Wealden, they have gone to us for monetary help. And we simply don't have the resources to do that. Hastings have turned them down, Wealden have turned them down. I agree with everybody that Freedom Leisure could come to Scrutiny and explain their position, but I don't see their position changing. I don't know what else to tell you, really, but I am happy that we're going to look at it at Scrutiny, and I was involved only as the decision was actually made. I was informed. And then Malcolm had a meeting with Ivan, who is the managing director, and they had quite an extensive, very friendly discussion explaining Rother's position. And since that time, they've announced then that they're going to close Rye Pool, which is their decision, and we were simply given that information. It is now up to us to respond to that, and obviously to the poor residents in Rye, and to the councillors that are having to deal with all the flack. And so I look forward to Freedom Leisure's response to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Timpey. I think we may as well move on from this. Do we want to vote? We've got to move in a seconder, so we may as well vote on this to put it onto the work programme, even though we discussed it later. But then at least the people who have come over will know we've done something, if you know what I mean. All those in favour of that proposal? That's carried. Thank you very much. Excellent. Right, if we get back to the agenda proper, if you like. Purpose of the report: to present the draft health, wellbeing and leisure facilities strategy for consideration and amendments prior to public consultation and a final approval by Cabinet and full Council. Recommendation is resolved that Cabinet be requested to approve the draft health, wellbeing and leisure facilities strategy prior to public consultation commencing in November 22. So who do I take? Do you want to take this one, Deborah? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Notwithstanding the conversation we've all just had, this is all about the vision for the future, when times are perhaps somewhat better than they are now, and the strategy going forwards. So this report outlines the background to the draft health, wellbeing and leisure facilities strategy, so-called at the moment because it had been published before it was discussed to change the title slightly, but we can do that going forwards if that's an agreed recommendation. And presently, I will hand over to Rachel Fowler, sitting beside me, who is the Managing Director of Strategic Leisure Limited, who will deliver a presentation on the draft strategy, and we'll both answer any questions you may have. So this, just briefly, the actual report, paragraphs 1 through to 6, provides some background to this report and refers to a previous project to develop the existing Bexhill Leisure Centre site to incorporate residential housing as well as new leisure facilities. This did not come to fruition due to a number of factors, including the financial pressures brought about by COVID on both the leisure industry and on the council, and also partly that the owners of the drill hall withdrew from the scheme. The leisure industry and the use of leisure facilities by residents, both indoors and outdoors, experienced many changes during the COVID pandemic years 2020 to 2022. And in January 2022, Cabinet agreed that these changes needed to be researched and analysed to create a vision and strategy on which to base the future leisure facilities. Subsequently, Strategic Leisure Limited, an expert in the leisure industry, was appointed to complete independent and in-depth market research across the district, analyse the results and draft a leisure facility strategy to support an active and healthy lifestyle for our residents across Rother District, now and into the future. Paragraph 7 of the report sets out the scope of the market research and strategy. The full draft health, wellbeing and leisure facility strategy can be found at Appendix B with an executive summary at Appendix A. And there are also 10 appendices to the strategy, and they evidence the level and depth of market research that forms the foundation of this strategy. It should be noted that alongside this work, RDC Planning Department has been reviewing the current playing pitch and leisure facility strategy that has a much wider scope across both Rother District and the Borough of Hastings. Paragraph 9 sets out the timetable and process for review, public consultation and final approval of the strategy prior to its adoption. It is important this timetable be met, as underlying the delivery of aspects of these services is the current contract with Freedom Leisure, which expires on the 31st of March 2024. So I will now hand over, Chairman, to Rachel Fowler to present the draft strategy. And we will both be happy to answer your questions when she's finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And thanks for inviting me along tonight. I'm going to run through the presentation. There's quite a lot of information on the slides. You'll be relieved to know I'm not going to read every single word, but as Deborah said, please feel free to ask any questions. And obviously, as Deborah said, this was written in a context prior to your earlier discussion tonight. But if, as I said, if that feeds into the discussion, then that's fine. So, Louise, thank you very much for pushing the presentation on. Could you go on to slide 1, please? Thank you. So just to start off with, we wanted to set out a vision for the future across Rother District, really, in terms of physical activity, leisure, provision. And I think it's really important that the vision stresses the working in partnership. So public sector leisure provided by local authorities is changing, has changed over recent years, because local authorities have less and less resources generally, and this is an area of discretionary spending. So actually you don't have to provide anything at all. You'd be the first local authority in the UK if you didn't, but it's worth remembering that it is an area of discretionary spend. I, of course, would say that you should spend on it because of all the benefits that it delivers. But in developing the vision, we wanted to stress that the role of the council doesn't just have to be a direct provider, it can be a facilitator and an enabler and a signposter, really, because there is also lots of other activities going on that aren't directly provided by the council across the district. So the vision is working in partnership to enable provision of good quality, accessible and inclusive leisure for both residents of and visitors to Rother because of the positive impact being active has on our health and well-being in our place. And the reason for including the emphasis on place is really important because at the moment there's a complete dearth of external funding for leisure from either the government or Sport England. Sport England's been going through a period of restructuring and are expecting to announce a new funding scheme next year, which will have an emphasis on place. So that's why we wanted to include it now, because if you do decide to look for any external funding, we might as well have you aligned to what they might be saying in the future. I think it's also just to stress as well that underpinning that vision, there are kind of 4 outcomes that that we think should be achieved in Rother, and that is the development of active environments. And this is where what Deborah mentioned, that outdoors is as important as the indoors. A lot of people's habits changed during COVID. Lots more people started walking, cycling, running, jogging, whatever. And a lot of people have kept doing that. And the market research we undertook actually demonstrated that about 50% of people who had changed their habits during COVID weren't going to change back again. So it's important that an active environment is available. Of course, it has to be safe if people are outside, and it needs to be connected, because if you're cycling or running or walking, you don't want to just go so far and then not be able to get any further. So that can be achieved in Rother through partnership working in the future with your towns and parish councils and other partners. Also, active communities. Active communities are healthier communities, both physically and mentally. And you have quite a low level of physical activity at the moment in Rother. So if that can be increased, there will be benefits derived from that because people feel better about themselves, they feel better about their place, they feel better about their communities. Healthy individuals, there are quite high health inequalities in Rother. There are some specific areas of deprivation, as you're all aware, in the borough. And generally speaking, people in more deprived areas are less likely to be active. They're also more likely to have higher health inequalities, less disposable income, and to have poorer mental health. And children growing up in those areas are less likely to be physically active from a young age. If they don't have that habit from a young age, they're not going to have it when they're older. So that's why it's really important. And also partnerships and collaborative working. The only way to deliver, really, moving forward is in partnership because no one organisation, and certainly not the council, can be the provider of everything anymore because there just aren't enough resources to go around. So the collaboration and partnership working is really important moving forward. Thank you, Louise. So, can you move? Okay, so just to set out some key principles underpinning the vision. I'm not going to read all of these out, but I've mentioned some of them in terms of the council being more of an enabler and a facilitator and a signposter to activities. It is important, if there is any new provision, that it is designed to achieve carbon neutrality or at least have as much green energy involved in its delivery and operation as possible. That can be challenging because often green energy costs quite a lot of money.
But when you're looking at some of your existing facilities, because of the age of the buildings, they're not as efficient to operate as they could be, and the plant is actually obsolete in some cases. So, you know, there are some opportunities even to look at moving forward. I think it's also important to stress the importance of accessibility. I don't just mean physical access. Are the doors wide enough to get a wheelchair through? Can somebody who's hard of hearing actually speak to receptionists? It's also about the location. You don't have a very high level of car ownership in Rother, so people need to be able to walk to get access to facilities. And in terms of them being able to use them, if there are connected routes, cycling and walking, to your leisure spaces and places, actually people can be active on the way to them. So that whole kind of concept about the active environment connecting into facilities helps to raise levels of activity. It's also important that your leisure facilities are sustainable. I don't really know whether I should say this in the kind of wake of the earlier conversation, but you need an operator partner who is sustainable and is a partner so that operation of facilities can be guaranteed, because otherwise people, you know, they might start doing something and then they can't carry on. So sustainability means, you know, reliable operation, but it also means the involvement of green energy and working towards carbon neutrality. I think one thing that the strategy does stress is that it's important to have an impact on those who will benefit most. So those people who are inactive in the district, those should be the people who are most supported to become active because of the kind of ripple effect of benefits of being active. If you can get one person active in a family, then there's more likely to be other people that will follow them. There's lots of research now proving that. But in order to get people active, it's got to be good quality provision, whether it's facilities or whether it's programmes or services. And I think one of the great examples in Rother is some of the walking programmes that you have operating from Bexhill Leisure Centre at the moment. The centre itself hasn't got all the spaces that it should have or could have really to benefit the programme more. But if you go down there in a daytime, the number of people who are playing walking football or walking netball or whatever, and those are spread out around the district, it's phenomenal. And those are people who wouldn't take part in kind of traditional leisure and sport activities. Can you move on, Louise, please? Thank you. So just in terms of why you need a strategy, there's loads of information on these slides, which is all in the report. But basically, if you don't have a strategy and a vision and an aim, then it's unlikely that you will achieve anything in terms of health and well-being priorities. And the importance of health and well-being runs through several of your other strategies at corporate level. So what we're trying to do is to align the future provision of physical activity, sport, leisure, whatever you want to call it, to those other strategies. It's also important, I think, to have a strategy, because that's what you can make decisions about, whether they're investment decisions or other decisions about partnerships, for example. Without a strategy, it's impossible to make decisions that kind of all stack up. I think it's also important to have a strategy so that you can identify key priorities to work towards. This is a 10-year strategy, so you don't have to achieve everything in year one, but you've got a long-term vision. And I think also the feedback from the market research that we undertook was really useful and very vocal about what local people want to see. So they do want to see some facilities, they do want to see a laned swimming pool, but actually they were also saying they want more provision of outdoor facilities, things like green gyms, BMX tracks, pump tracks, cycle tracks, walking routes, safe walking routes, all of these things. So there's a list now in the strategy of priorities to work towards. Can you move on, please, Louise? Okay. Actually, you can go on to the next slide as well. I think there's so much detail on that. I won't dwell on it, but it's all in the strategy. So the aim of developing this strategy is that to enable visitors and residents in Rother to improve their health and well-being by increasing opportunities to be physically active, both outdoors and indoors. And it is really important that both of those areas are stressed. Some people don't want to take part in activities indoors. Lots of people would rather do it outdoors, especially in the wake of COVID. And also, for some people, particularly older people, they haven't returned to indoor facilities in the same numbers that they were pre-COVID. And some of that is because older facilities, and you have some of them, are actually really hard to operate in a safe manner.
I think that was a remote Councillor Ganley sneezing or something.
What was that?
Not you.
Shall I carry on?
Yes.
Sorry, that's completely thrown me. Okay.
Apologies.
No, it's fine. It's fine. And then also just to stress that with the strategy aim, that the future role of the District Council should be coordinating, facilitating and enabling and actually encouraging people to be active. And this is where the role of Active Rother, for example, becomes even more important, because they can engage with people on the ground, get them involved in activities and actually take activities out to them. It doesn't just have to be within four walls. Okay, Louise, thank you. Okay. And then we had some discussion with members as part of developing this strategy, and members were very keen to have a very clear objective for the strategy. It's that they want to provide maximum access for residents to all provision, and that they also want to have specific regard to those living in deprived circumstances, as I mentioned earlier. So any provision, built or otherwise, outreach, outdoors, needs to be sustainable and affordable, both in terms of providing it, but also affordable for people to take part, because that's quite a major barrier for some people. But it also provision needs to be realistic in the long term, so that the council is able to deliver consistently and things don't just happen and then they get taken away again. So we identified some criteria for developing potential future facility developments. Is that they must be accessible by public transport, particularly for those living in rural areas or more deprived communities. They should make a clear contribution to addressing health inequalities. They should contribute to the goal of the council to be carbon neutral by 2030, and that it should complement provision delivered by the private sector. There is quite a lot of private sector provision in the district. Some of it is only accessible to people who are members. Some of it is just accessible on a private basis. So the council's role should be facilitating provision that complements that. Louise, thank you. And then in terms of implementing the strategy, just really to highlight that provision of outdoor facilities are now a higher priority for your residents, and perhaps as an opportunity to work in partnership with your town and parish councils over developing outdoor provision. They have the ability to raise precepts if necessary, but they are also actually responsible for a lot of local provision, and things like green gyms, can be put in relatively, I'm not going to say cheaply, but they're easier to afford than built provision. And there may also be a way of working with community groups to actually take care of that kind of provision when it's in the community. That Rother District Council will seek to form some partnerships, potentially with your neighbouring authorities over future provision, because working across boundaries is likely to be more effective as well, especially in terms of bringing in external funding. Louise, thank you. And then in terms of kind of actually implementing the strategy and moving on to next steps as well, that Rother will also look to work in partnership with some existing providers such as education, some schools, for example, who have facilities on their sites which either aren't open at all to members of the public or are only open on a restricted basis. The strategy contains some details on exact capacities that could be available to perhaps open up sports halls and gyms and possibly even pools for longer to the community. Clearly, the council can't force that to happen because if they're owned by education and there is no formal dual use agreement, it would have to be by negotiation. But we suggest that that is a really good place to start, following on from investing in some outdoor provision as well. And then there is a need to look at the swimming offer across the district. You're a coastal authority. Learning to swim is very important. And there is a lack of lane swimming facilities in the district. Your existing lane swimming are part of the leisure pool in Bexhill, which is of an age and it's not particularly easy to swim lengths in a pool with a wave machine. And then the other really key priority is to build on promoting and providing infrastructure to increase use of cycling and walking across the district. I think I'm going to stop there. I think we've covered most of the points, but happy to take any questions.
Chairman, I'll redeclare personal interest. Thank you. See as Executive Member at East Sussex County Council.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Rachel. Very in-depth. I like the... I'm a cyclist, and I like the fact that you said early on, some people cycle so far and then they run out. Well, if I go west, I hit Fairlight, so I generally go east towards Folkestone. It's flatter. Any specific questions? John, Councillor Barnes first.
Yes, one of the things when I was a non-exec in the health service that we identified as crucial for elderly people was dancing, ballroom dancing particularly, because one of the things that older people lose, as I know to my cost, is balance. And dancing gives you more control. It's not only a physical activity, but it gives you much more control and improves your balance. And yet it's curiously missing from most of this strategy. It also is quite a useful social activity and deals to some extent with the loneliness problem. So I would like to see a little more focus on that in the revised strategy, which I hope the Cabinet are going to approve.
Would that include disco as well, John? The rest of it? A bit of hip-hop or spinning on your back?
I think all forms of dancing are beneficial, but ballroom dancing, and this is why I was asking my question really of why there was so little focus on that, was identified as being particularly beneficial.
I apologise, I was being a bit flippant there. But, any other? Councillor Cortell? Oh, and then Councillor Gray after.
Thank you, Chair. I notice that there's a distinct omission of an element of subsidy for people on low incomes, whether it's addressing how they travel to the facility or the fees for using the relevant facility. I noticed in your paper that there's a link between, you're advising us to have a link between the use to the community and the amount of subsidy. That I endorse, but equally, I think we ought to think of individuals on low incomes or people in deprived areas and how they can actually access the indoor facilities.
Do you have an answer to that one?
Job of a strategy is probably not to say, you know, what the subsidy should be or how it should set out that it's a priority, and it does say that there would be a focus on people who would need support most. I think the implementing the strategy and particularly linking it to your next leisure management contract, should you decide to continue to outsource it, that's where that becomes really key. So in other words, the extent of your concessionary approach, it should be specified in that document, and then when you get tenders back, people tendering should take that into account. So the price you get builds in that subsidy. So it's within the overall contract. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I wondered if it would be acceptable if we could have 2 or 3 lines added to your report as an additional point.
I mean, that is the council's decision. So I'm more than happy to say that. I think that it's important that a commitment is I'm not going to say the right commitment, that if it's a commitment, that everybody recognises the commitment that's being made in there. So please come back to me on that. I'm happy to make that link.
Second point, Chair. It concerns the demographics of the respondents to the survey. I notice a considerable proportion are over 65, and I'm wondering whether people in their 20s, 30s and 40s have been overlooked here, who may be more likely to use built leisure facilities and are perhaps underrepresented.
Research that was undertaken did provide a representative sample compared with the borough demographics. There was quite a lot of care and attention to make sure that that happened. I think we did get sufficient response from people in those age groups, but I think generally speaking, you would get a lot of older people filling in questionnaires and surveys. The same thing happened during COVID as well. So what we did was we actually did talk to some younger adults and some younger people as well, and that's where, particularly from younger people, there was also an emphasis on outdoor facilities, informal provision. But all the detail of the market research is, I can't remember which appendix number it is now, but I've also got all the raw data if you want to have a look at it. Does that answer
Thank
your
you very
question?
much. Yes, it does. I mean, I'm very impressed with your overall research and the detail you've been into. That just stood out like a building block when I looked at Appendix 1.
Councillor Barnes, did you want to come back on did you want to answer to your question about ballroom dancing?
Yes, can I couple it? I didn't get a comment on, and probably because I didn't phrase it quite questionably enough, but can I couple it with another thing that I would have liked to seen some comment in the report on? In a sense, I'd like a comment tonight from Ms. Fowler, and that is what consideration was given to working with GP surgeries about using their powers to prescribe physical activity, how that will be coordinated with our strategy.
So consultation was undertaken with Public Health, East Sussex Public Health, the director, spoke to him, and he's very supportive of that. In the implementation plan that will sit underneath the strategy, that will be a key target, if you like, or a key action. I think at local level, it is sometimes challenging to get all GPs on board with GP referrals and social prescribing. But you're right, it should definitely be part of the way forward. And I think, again, public health and physical activity should be working hand in hand, really, towards the same aims of just getting people more active. It doesn't matter what they do, they just need to be more active, generally. So I'll make a note that that comes out in the implementation plan.
Councillor Gray, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel, for a very interesting report and very comprehensive. You mentioned the changes from COVID, but one of the big changes that I noticed was that instructors who were giving lessons like Pilates and yoga in halls then went online on Zoom and are still continuing because they've proved so popular. So I just wondered whether that had had an impact on leisure centres, and maybe that's why more people wanted outdoor activities, because less are going indoors.
So nationally, people going back to leisure centres, it's at about 75% of where it was pre-COVID. People, so the fastest recovering activities are swimming lessons in particular, because 3 cohorts of young people missed out. And then gym is been the second biggest. So I think definitely the combination of online classes it's helped some people come in, but it's also stopped some people and made them exercise at home. Most operators now offer a complete combination of online and face-to-face. And actually, one of the biggest challenges, apart from energy at the moment in the leisure sector, is you can't get instructors or coaches or swimming teachers because they're all driving Tesco vans or whatever. There's a massive dearth because people haven't been trained. So
it does seem irony in that we've mentioned swimming probably 24 times. but there we are. Councillor Maynard.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And I think that whilst the report is fulsome, I think that it's really important to just put a little bit of context on this for anybody watching the meeting online or for anybody who doesn't know what we've already been doing in Rother for many years. And I genuinely want to pay tribute to the staff members here who have particularly enabled parish and town councils to deliver outstanding outdoor facilities, both during the life of our administration, and indeed I'm glad to say that it has continued under this administration in terms of the idea of match funding, the idea of helping organisations and clubs to access funding. And if you went around and spoke to members, I don't think you'd find any exception whereupon a local bowls club, a parish council have delivered outstanding outdoor facilities. And that has happened for, and let's put it in context, decades on Rother District Council, and BMX tracks have been referenced, and that work was started under our administration, has been continued, and we've seen the result of that in Sidley. So it's not just the parish and towns, it's across the piece. In terms of dry facilities, I actually think that with the sports development officers here, with other officers that have helped, and sadly some of those are no longer work for the authority, and I'm particularly thinking about the work that Scott Lavacker did, and I will name him because he did such a good job. But Adrian Galen, of course, and forgive me if I'm not mentioning every member of staff who's been involved in terms of the community grants, but it's really important that members of the public understand that in terms of those dry facilities, that again, across the whole of the 199 square miles of Rother, we've actually done really well, and we're continuing to do really well on delivering those facilities. And I have to say, this report has just amplified and in fact, amply illustrated exactly what we are doing really well. So that leads me then to perhaps the more controversial issue, which is the issue around wet facilities. And forgive me for teaching anybody to suck eggs, but you know that up and down the country, if you're delivering a wet facility will not wipe its face. It will not make a profit. And if you're designing a new wet facility, you need to have a comprehensive scheme whereupon that there are other factors that input the bill to make it affordable to any local authority. And I make no apologies to say that we pushed very hard under the previous administration to get a new Bexhill Leisure Centre with a new wet facility there. And I make no apologies for saying that we care very passionately about providing high-quality wet facilities, and I echo the comments that Councillor Courtell's made, that are accessible for everybody, because I think that's hugely important. When you look at the health benefits of people, for example, who are recovering from medical procedures, and that they can actually access local swimming procedures, hugely beneficial. And the bit in the report that I don't like, and if I'm blunt, and excuse me if I'm going to be accused of making a political comment, but the bit I don't like is where we talk about, and I will draw members' attention to it, where we talk about as an authority, us becoming, let me just lift the paragraph, excuse me, my computer switched off for a moment there, Becoming a signposter rather than a provider of facilities for residents, it is clear the private facilities are run, and it goes on to talk about local authority leisure operators. But the reality is that, of course, there are going to be difficult decisions for councils up and down the country as we go forward. We understand, and every authority understands the really difficult issues around wet facilities. But what worries me about this report, and I fully accept that there's no hidden agenda, but I would draw your attention that that line clearly demonstrates that it is not ambitious enough in having a genuine and achievable target about not only providing wet facilities, but maintaining them for the short, for the medium, for the longer term. Because it should be an aim for every councillor on this authority to be able to do that. And this survey amply illustrates, it's actually told us what, frankly, I said towards the end of the last administration that we run, that it is vital that we have high-quality wet facilities in this district. And we've heard earlier on about the issues in Rye. We hear, obviously, and we know about the fact that the current Bexhill facility, frankly, is towards the end of its usable life. But, you know, there are choices for local authorities to make. Those choices, as we go forward, will be difficult. There is a choice about the priorities of respective political groups. And on our side of the chamber, we've been very clear that one of our priorities back in 2019 would have been to provide a new wet facility. I do think that that is a contrast with the current administration. But I do think, and I would urge councillors of all colours to reject that particular paragraph. And as it is, because that paragraph is in there, I frankly think that it's a cop-out for any future administration that doesn't deliver on quality wet facilities. And I think by talking about us as an enabler, we are not grasping the nettle, because the private sector is not going to provide a quality new wet facility, not in this district or any other. We need to be honest and upfront about that. We need to be honest and upfront, as Councillor Cortell referenced earlier, about the necessity to work with providers and about any level of subsidy, not just to build but to run the facility. But I return back to my previous comments about choices. I think the previous project was achievable in terms of the Bexhill Leisure Centre project. There's talk there about the project no longer being cost neutral. I've put it on record previously. I absolutely abhor that type of phrase. But it was a choice of this administration to not develop the site as we would have done, to make it financially viable. And I think we need to be really putting the best foot forward on this and actually being honest with the electorate and say to the good residents of Rother that we will not only maintain our wet facilities, that we will update them as they're required. Now, yes, I accept that's a big ask. But the reality is, as this strategy is currently prepared, it is not ambitious enough. And ladies and gentlemen, with that paragraph in it, and it doesn't matter who is sitting in this chamber after next year, but potentially, if this was adopted as a 10-year strategy, it gives effectively, and I go back to my earlier comment, with that sentence in there, it's a cop-out for any future administration not to deliver on what the residents are clearly asking for, both in terms of what is contained within the excellent survey results, in terms of high-quality swimming facility. And I will just go back a little bit and say that, and it's a useful bit of context. Forgive me for going on a little too long, Chairman, but it's a useful context. I can remember when I used to go swimming as a child, because I declare an interest, Chairman, as an avid swimmer as I then was, going along to the White Rock Baths in Hastings, which was a proper Olympic-sized pool, which had resident cockroaches, but it was still really well used facility. And when the new Summerfields opened, and there was a cock-up over the size of the pool, it being only 33 metres and not 50, because they forgot about a certain railway tie. Anyway, we won't go into that. But what I want to say is there was universal acclaim at the time when that new pool opened. You know, that has seen a footfall that's been incredible over the years. The same happened when, somewhat later, in 1990, I think it was, we opened the Bexhill Leisure Centre, and I can remember going to that. It wasn't to the same level as Summerfields. And I can remember when having first joined the authority back in 1999, we opened the Rye swimming pool and the fanfare that opened that. And I pay tribute to the hard work for councillors that are still with us, of all political colours, still with us in presence, but Councillor Sam Sewster, who was Labour, of course, and other previous Labour councillors, Conservative councillors, really pushed hard for local residents in Rye to get the Rye swimming pool. But I just think, with that sentence in there, talking about enabler, and I accept, and I reference my earlier comments about dry facilities, that of course we should enable the private, and there should be partnerships with the private sector. But I do think, genuinely, that just doesn't go far enough and doesn't give us a commitment in there that this council, whatever political colour, after next May, and after May, where would it be, 26, going forward, if it's a 10-year strategy, as has been alluded to earlier, it's not giving residents that clear commitment that not only will they have wet facilities, but that they will be quality wet facilities so that we can make sure, and going back to the earlier comment, that the health and well-being and indeed leisure activity in Rother is among the best in the South East. That's what we should aspire to. That's what we should be pushing for. And I'm sorry, this doesn't go far enough. And as it currently sits, in terms of that sentence about enabling, as that sits, I couldn't support it. I would want that deleted. Thank you, Chairman.
Well, I don't think we can probably disagree with that. When I sort of see it myself, I thought, well, does that mean that we sort of sit back and wait for, I don't know, Bannatynes to turn up and say, we'd like to build a swimming pool, and as far as we go is say, yeah, here's planning permission. Is that the thing? Is that an enabler? We just give saying planning permission as opposed to actually doing it and providing for residents. So I would agree with that, and you know, we've sort of tried to the council has tried to sort of, you know, build things and make things better, and I think that sort of statement should probably, you know, needs to come out, to be honest. And, got a few hands up now. I'll start from the far end and work this way. Yeah, Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Chair. I'll get that Councillor Maynard's paragraph out of the way first. I think I agree with Councillor Maynard. I think perhaps instead of signposting, instead of providing services, it should be perhaps signposting as well as. I think that's a sensible thing, because signposting is important, but it's not a cop-out. It shouldn't be a cop-out for actually trying to provide facilities when and where possible. I think I'm glad the confusion over the title has been rectified, because coming at it from an anti-poverty perspective, where we've been talking about health and well-being in terms of that side of things, to suddenly see a strategy come up saying health and well-being, I was a little bit thrown. I was like, oh, is this another anti-poverty strategy? But it's talking from the leisure side of things, so I'm glad that's been rectified. I think as a 26-year-old overweight, arthritic, asthmatic, from a low-income family, I'm possibly the key demographic that some of this is trying to appeal to. And so unusually, instead of thinking just what would my residents want, I've also been thinking, well, what would I want? What would get me to go and exercise? And certainly decent swimming pool facilities in my local area would be one of those. So I think that is key, and that's reflected in some of the responses from residents, whether that's residents in Rye who need a swimming pool or residents in Bexhill who also need a swimming pool that is decent and good to use. I think, if I may, and I usually do, advertise Sidley a little bit as being both part of Bexhill, which is sort of the urban centre of the district, but also the northern part of Bexhill and the nearest part of Bexhill to the rest of Rother, only a 10-minute drive up Coombe Valley Way to Hastings and St Leonard's and other areas, as being the perfect area for leisure facilities. And already we're seeing people coming into Sidley to use our fantastic new BMX and skateboard track. The cricket's back in Sidley now that I know people will be coming to watch in St Mary's Field. Hopefully, and I will say Gulliver's right now, nice and loudly, so all of the councillors have Gulliver's on their mind, because that has been sitting empty for a long time. And if we're looking at leisure facilities and a future leisure strategy, I personally wouldn't sit by and watch that happen without Gulliver's being in there somewhere. Obviously, with all of this, though, there is the issue of funding. I know the government has talked about levelling up, and I think there's a bid gone into levelling up funding for sort of things similar to this, leisure and stuff, but without that levelling up funding, it's very hard to level up our district, and I sort of endorse the fact that this strategy is trying to do that with a very sort of poor hand, if you like, as are councils up and down the country. I think we need to not forget, I think Councillor Cortell mentioned young people in terms of this sort of responses to the survey, and I think when young people are mentioned, technology is often also mentioned as well, and I think we shouldn't dismiss some of the recent advances in technology in terms of ways to get fit, not just sort of virtual sort of Zumba lessons or whatever, but also things like VR, virtual reality, and the use of video games as a way to get active, which some more modern, forward-thinking leisure facilities incorporate these sort of technological things, which both entice these young people who may be sitting at home on their Xbox to come and actually take part in some sort of video game, VR form of exercise. But it's also quite exciting for older generations to have a go at as well in a supervised environment. So I think let's not forget VR and technology. Let's be ambitious and forward-thinking and make whatever we do in rather something that other places look at and go, yeah, that's really good. We should look at doing that as well. So I agree with Councillor Maynard that ambition is key here, and certainly I think every councillor in Rother has that ambition in their mind, and it just has to be weighted against that unfortunate reality of sort of financial stability that we're all far too aware of. I think I just want to also touch on Councillor Cortell's points about affordability, and particularly those on low incomes. And I think rather than perhaps just as schemes looking at membership for those on low incomes, because obviously it can be a barrier to leisure facilities if you have to bring along your benefits forms to get a particular membership or whatever. I think we also might want to look at sort of like a local membership scheme that is cheaper than for those people who are coming from outside of town and visiting our leisure facilities, in a way to entice local people and residents to use our leisure facilities. Perhaps there could be a membership card that's like I'm a Rother resident, I get to use facilities slightly cheaper, whereas obviously we can capitalise on that investment from people who are visiting our area when they want to use those facilities. So I think that's important. Speaking on Councillor Barnes's point, as the former winner of the East Sussex School of Performing Arts Choreographic Cup back in my childhood, I can attest to the importance of dance in terms of fitness. It's something that's accessible for someone even as large as myself. I'd much rather have a boogie than sort of go for a jog. In fact, just saying go for a jog there sent alarm bells in my mind. But a dance is definitely a good thing. Perhaps we could have a dance here afterwards. But anyway, yes. So I think we need to see more arts involvement in this strategy. I didn't see anything in there really about the arts, and I think dance and performance as well, like acting, going on stage. All of those areas of the arts can be a way to get active and be expressive, and use creativity as an enabler to get active. And finally, I just want to say, because I know I've been speaking for a long time, that in terms of collaborative working, I think that is a really good point. And I know that in Sidley, for example, we have the Martletts Bowls Club, who are quite interested in taking on their ID Verdi currently have the contract to maintain their grounds, and they would be interested in taking that on instead, which would save the council money. And I think if we can talk to our local clubs, talk to our local groups, because quite a few of them may have ideas for how they could maybe take part and help and collaborate with us to help keep their services both sustainable but also running them cheaper, I think that would be good. And finally, just to reiterate my point of Gullivers, 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 let's not forget about Gullivers. Thank you.
Right. Well, I think I agree. There's one thing we agree on is, personally, I wouldn't run across a road. So there it is. Councillor Stevens.
I'm all for health, well-being and leisure. I think it's the way forward. We all need to get fitter and healthier. I'm just going back onto what you were saying about wet facilities. Rye has a perfect wet facility, and it's got lanes. We have school children learning to swim there. Elderly people go from the doctors with illnesses. We must try and help this facility. It needs to stay open. for a lot of reasons. I mean, as I mentioned earlier on as well, the lifeguards as well. You know, they're trained there. You know, you did say that there's lack of lane facilities. Rye has lane facilities. Thank you, Rachel.
Deirdre, Councillor Williams.
During the last administration, it was, as Councillor Maynard referred to, quite a large sum of money, which put the people of Bexhill in with great excitement because we thought we were going to get a new leisure facility, or at least update the existing one. Some of that money went to something else, the Town Centre Steering Group, but I understand there's probably still some money left. And the slight worry to me is that it was kind of mentioned about partnerships, and I don't think that would work because it needs to be retained in rather. And once you start spreading your wings out, people just won't travel, especially if you've got young children or if you're elderly. You're not going to want to travel that far. So, all in all, and referring to Councillor Barnes and his dancing, I've got to just say that in Bexhill we have many dancing groups. Many. My mother used to go regularly, and she was well in her 80s. So I'm sure if you're really feeling like it, John, that you could get you some information. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair. Councillor Deirdre Williams mentioned this pot of money fizzling away. I believe it was about £1 million, and 900,000 was earmarked for leisure, for a built leisure centre. It is still ring-fenced and is still there. It's a drop in a bucket in terms of a possible 15 million would have to find or raise from various grants to have a new leisure centre, but yes, it hasn't been squandered.
I didn't say it had.
Where did you get that from? I got the impression that you were...
said some of it was spent on something else with Town Centre Steering Group, and some was left, which is what I said.
Pounds was spent out of 1 million.
And that is Bexhill specific, so don't get your hopes up in Rye, I'm afraid. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, let me begin locally with Etchingham, because first of all I would want to pay tribute to this council, because they put £50,000 into the project which we worked with the school to develop 2 community halls, one of which is available during the day and the other out of school hours. Equally, we were able to have a CIC that created a physical gym, outdoor physical gym in Etchingham. Good examples of partnership, good examples of how Rother played a part. One of the key factors, of course, is we not only, when we sold the site of the existing village hall, but we then also used the Public Works Loan Board to spread over 50 years some of the costs of these new facilities. And borrowing is a factor in making sure these sort of strategies work. We even still have an option on a sports field, which is one thing that Etchingham lacks. But we do find now in our community hall that there is a great deal of badminton, there is a great deal of physical walking football. We even tried indoor nets in there. It's amazing what a small community can do with encouragement and by making ingenious use of finance. And Rother has a proud tradition of this. The whole community grant scheme was a crucial factor. I think, in many places, across rural rather, in actually developing the facilities. Sometimes you have historic facilities funded by trusts that are memorials for people who fell in both world wars. But they need to be updated, and that's where the parish councils can play their aim. One of the problems with the public sector is that where the investment is made, the return is often to another authority or another body altogether. The investment in physical activity and other recreational activity will have enormous benefits in lessening the costs of the health service, in actually lessening the costs of adult social care. Because if people are actually social rather than lonely, if they are actually physically active, you will prolong not just their life, but you will prolong their active life. And that is the real objective of this strategy. It's not just to provide leisure facilities or enable leisure facilities, it's actually to improve people's life chances. I will allow myself, I was not going to speak about web facilities at all, but I have to say that this is an area where you do need local government participation. They very rarely make a profit. And if you are a coastal authority, I grew up on the north coast of Cornwall, learning to swim is absolutely essential. Because you will go in the water, and if you don't go in the water and know what you're doing, you will die. So it's absolutely crucial to Rother that we have adequate wet facilities. Coming on to the way we need to develop this strategy, and I think it does need to be a dynamic strategy, not a static one. There are two principles which I think are totally misstated. The one which Councillor Maynard has already identified, page 21, key principle 2, appears to exclude direct provision by the authority. As I've already said, direct provision is probably going to be essential. Even if you get somebody else to operate it, you will still need to put the capital in to the physical facility for swimming. We need a training pool, not merely a laned pool. We need a laned pool, and you need some space for people simply to recreationally plunge and come out. And that's going to be quite expensive, but spread over 50 years. It's an investment, and there will be a payback somewhere in the public sector, not least in people coming out of hospital, convalescing, and needing to improve their muscles, which is quite an important use of a swimming pool, which must not be overlooked. The other one, which I think is distinctly unambitious, is Principle 6. It's not carbon neutrality. We actually need them, as far as possible, to be energy efficient and positive. We need as many facilities as possible to actually use solar power, to actually keep themselves off the national grid as far as they possibly can. You'll never do it totally because, of course, in the winter, there is less hours of daylight and sun. And, of course, again, in the winter, the wind doesn't always blow, so the national grid does need a base. But carbon neutrality is actually not enough. We do need our facilities to actually become as energy efficient as possible and to minimize their running costs. Because energy over the rest of this century is not going to get any cheaper, and wind power increasingly will play less part, solar power hopefully more part. I think we need to bring out the health benefits. We need, therefore, in a sense, to fit this into the wider health and well-being strategy which the East Sussex Board is doing. We need to build the medical profession in, working very closely with the new health partnership, which is taking place between the hospital and the GPs. But you need essentially to get primary care on side, because that's a crucial provider of some funds, and we need to try to persuade them to invest some money with us, so that we're not solely dependent on our own resources or on government resources. But above all, we really need a dynamic strategy that gets everybody on side and sees this as an absolute top priority, because we do actually need to benefit the people of an authority which is going to have one of the largest number of older people in the country, which on the whole is not that economically prosperous. It's fine where you have commuters into London, but our wage levels are actually low. And if you look at most of the villages in Rother, nearly all of them have about a fifth of the population which are actually below the relative income level which defines poverty. Now, I have some questions about relative measures, but nevertheless what they indicate is that while you have concentrated poverty in Sydney and to some extent in Sackville and above all in Central Ward, you also have pockets of poverty out there in the villages, and their life chances actually tend to get missed because we focus on the concentrated poverty. So this needs to be an authority-wide strategy, and we need to involve the parishes as active partners. They can do an awful lot, and they do have access to their ability to raise revenue, which can be very helpful.
Chairman, if it's helpful to move the debate on, as I've already alluded to earlier, I dislike the phrase cost neutrality, and I also equally despise the use of the phrase carbon neutrality, because I think that in every document this council produces, it should be understandable by the man, the woman in the street. And so I think we just need to insert, as Councillor Barnes has suggested, after we talk about carbon neutrality, by all means, for those who like the phrase, leave it in there, but then we just need to say that any facility needs to be as energy efficient as possible, as environmentally sustainable as possible. That's in language that people understand. And the other one, as I've said, I'd like to delete 6 to 18.5 when we talk about become a signposter rather than. That's the key. Become a signposter rather than a provider of facility. I think, as Councillor Coleman suggests, as well as, rather than implies you're not going to be a provider. It doesn't say as well as, does it? It's rather than. So if we can do, as Councillor Barnes has suggested, and I'm happy to, if Councillor Barnes is moving, happy to second it in terms of the statement around carbon neutrality and adding in those words I've suggested. And secondly, to delete, I think it needs rewriting, to be frank, Chairman, to say that become a signposter as well as.
Yes, I think we need, I will second that. I think we need to rework Principle 2, and the phrase that Councillor Maynard picked out from later on needs to be rewritten. We must be the provider of last resort, because you will never get, and as a coastal authority we need it, you will never get swimming facilities, I think, to pay for themselves.
Right, I'm just mindful we've been on this for probably over an hour and 20 minutes. So I know Councillor Mooney and Councillor Cook wanting to speak. Have you got anything sort of superiorly relevant, Councillor Mooney, that would be worth saying, or are you going to repeat everything that everybody else has said?
Yes, I'll be very brief. And even with I support what Councillor Maynard has said with regard to, and Councillor Williams said with regard to a leisure facility for the district. We promised it We were thwarted by land deals. We were thwarted by other things such as other premises not being freely available. So if you go to page 21, instead of enabling, I suggest we say taking the lead in partnership with other authorities in providing leisure facilities. We should really, we did promise years ago a leisure facility here, and it's overdue. So that's what I would say. And number two, I would say the council's role is one of being able to provide, not enabler, but be able to provide and take the lead in opportunities. So we should be the provider of last resort, as somebody said. We should be, driving the vehicle, as we promised years ago.
Can you turn your machine off? Thank you. Councillor Cook, are you...
I was merely going to recommend that we resolved the recommendation with the additional change so that it's now entitled rather health and wellbeing - leisure facilities, and then the addition of the special provision for people who do not currently use facilities due to poor health or financial reasons. And then resolve it, recommend. But Councillor Maynard beat me to it.
Right, I'll get Ben to go over it. Hang on, Hazel.
Right, so I've just been trying to pick up some of the points that have been made by various members. What we'll do, obviously, the strategy will go to Cabinet as a referral from this group as it currently exists, but with a list of recommendations from this committee for change. Obviously, we've had about including references to dancing, in particular ballroom dancing from Councillor Barnes, make mention of community grant scheme, which has been picked up a few times, particularly in developing rural facilities, concessions for poor communities and young people, increased mention of carbon negativity and changing the language to more energy efficient. These are all things that we'll put up in the general conversation. Involve the parishes as active participants from Councillor Barnes, better references to technology and using this to attract younger people into activity, local membership options, and I'm going to say Gulliver's because it's been said a few times, although if I said that to the residents of Buckholt Lane, they might do something to me I wouldn't appreciate, because the thought of thousands of people descending upon them every week probably isn't a great thing. But the other key thing is with a specific recommendation to remove point 1 or amend point 1 of the strategy, which is Rother should be a deliverer of facilities, not a signpost, or as well as a signposter. So those will be recommended. We'll sort of formulate those into specific recommendations that can go to Cabinet for consideration. It's not next week, as it is the following week.
With that, Chairman, as the mover of the amendments.
Councillor Timpey, you wanted to just quick one?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make it clear, because I think there's maybe a bit of misunderstanding with what we mean by facilities. We're not actually talking about an all-singing, all-dancing leisure centre here. What we're talking about is responding to the survey, which was primarily about laned swimming, and then bringing in or making that a destination centre, which then could bring in other revenue-providing activities, such as what Sam was talking about, for younger people. So I think we need to be clear about that, because we don't have the resources to...
Hold a point of clarity. We are talking about that. We've been very clear throughout this debate, and if Councillor Timpey hasn't heard that as a clear siren call from this committee, then she's not listening, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I am listening. What I'm trying to point out to you is that nowhere does it say a leisure centre facility. It is providing what the survey has asked for: more outdoor facilities, a lane swimming pool. That does not translate into a leisure centre. You need to be very clear about that.
I think we'll have to probably agree to disagree to a to a degree, if you know what I mean. but I think you get the gist of what's been said.
No, thank you, Chair. And could I just thank the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because the whole point of bringing it, obviously, before you was to get your opinions and your insight. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's fine. Well, I think in general we're quite happy, aren't we? But there's just a few little bits that Ben's picked up, which we can put to Cabinet, and Cabinet will either listen or they won't, and that'll be their prerogative. So we've got it moved and seconded.
Chairman, can we just bring out, we are talking about a 10-year strategy. We're not talking about next year.
No.
And it seems to me to, define leisure facility. I would not want simply to confine our effort to a lane swimming pool, because it's probably much more efficient to have a group of physical recreation facilities together, some of which will make money. So the notion of a partnership of some kind. But at the end of the day, there are going to be elements of that make a loss. And that is where we must be realistic and make sure they fit into the programme. Where we can get income, we should get income.
I think I should cover Tony's ears when you say make a loss. He doesn't like it. I think that's been moved and seconded. What I will say is I'm pleased as well, because one of my parishes is currently working on a bid for some outdoor gym equipment. So there we are. It's all good. It's moved and seconded. We've had a super debate on it. All those in favour of the amendment as Councillor Maynard has put? It looks like that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We better move on. I don't know if you people from Rye want to listen to the next bit, but I'm afraid don't forget the 259 is closed from 8 o'clock, so you might have to go through Breed and Udimore. The 259 is closed from 8 o'clock, so you have to go through Udimore. Right, where are we? Right on. Joe's been extremely patient, sitting there at home. East Sussex Temporary Accommodation Policy, page 61. Councillor Maynard, if he's not here, he will redeclare his interest. Officer recommendation, resolved East Sussex Temporary Accommodation Policy be recommended to Cabinet and full Council for adoption. This is basically, we've got, Joe, you sat there long enough, you may as well say what it is.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can take it from here. Thank you, Chair. And apologies, everyone, for not being there with you tonight, but personal issues have stopped me from joining you. But I'll do my best from up here. Thank you, Chair. The East Sussex Temporary Accommodation Policy is been brought forward really by the operational managers of the housing needs teams in East Sussex, the 5 local authority areas, to try and provide some more consistency for the experience of people in East Sussex when they're accessing temporary accommodation, and to ensure that the standards we're applying and the policies or the processes we're applying are as similar as they can be. It's important to highlight in the report, as the report highlights, to the scope of the policy and to indicate what it doesn't include. It's not trying to replace legislation or the fact that we are governed by the Housing Act and various iterations of it in order to make placements and the reasons for that. So things impact such as rough sleeping or levels of homelessness, or who does or doesn't go into temporary accommodation, are not covered by this policy. Those are set in legislation. But I hope the report gives an overview of what the policy does attempt to include, things like a consistent charging policy, a consistent approach to prioritising the most vulnerable households and ensuring they don't have to use shared facilities, and that's avoided wherever possible. Also prioritising certain categories of household when being forced to make placements further afield than within Rother. So as members will also be aware, we're making great efforts in Rother to, over many years, through various administrations, to improve the quality of accommodation available to people forced to access it and use for when homeless for temporary accommodation, including most recently an approach of investment to have our own stock under our own management. So, yeah, I hope that's explained a brief overview of what the policy does try to include and also what it doesn't try to include. But happy to take questions and, over to you.
Thank you, Joe. I assume that this, well, I won't say assume, this will be an improvement. I expect the idea is that wherever you are in East Sussex, if all councils have the same policy, then obviously if you're homeless, you may be sort of transient. So it's easier if you say you're in Hastings or Wilden and you end up in Rother, the policy is the same. So you sort of know, or the process is similar to getting somewhere temporary to live, wherever you are in East Sussex, which has got to be easier.
Yeah, I think what we were finding, what office managers were reporting back, is that there was inconsistency and it was affecting the experience, because many of our households are sharing similar facilities but placed by different local authorities, for example. The market out there, we're using a range of providers and their expectations are now easier to manage when we have a consistent approach to what we expect of them in terms of standards and approaches to placement. So their expectations of the customer, the client, are better managed, and of our providers are better managed as well. So those are the two principal reasons. But really, as well, thirdly, it's an expectation of government that we make clear our standards and what our customers expect. And we've aligned essentially our standards to the code of guidance that the government produces for our and governs the application of the Homeless Act and Homelessness Reduction Act and the Protection from Eviction Act, various acts that govern this. Those are the three principal reasons for bringing it forward. I should have said actually, but we've been de facto adopted this in practice for some months and longer. It's just been a case of getting all the I's dotted and T's crossed to bring it forward across 5 districts and boroughs. I'm sure members will appreciate that's been a job in itself.
Good.
Personal interest, Chairman, as executive member.
That when you went out. I'll go with Councillor Coleman, then we'll go with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is really sensible, and I'm happy to move it to be recommended upwards. One question I would ask, Joe, just out of curiosity, what are the numbers like in terms of temporary accommodation in sort of recent months? I presume there's been an increase in sort of people needing temporary accommodation.
Yeah, indeed. We do regularly report that number as part of the quarterly performance updates. But the number at the moment is around 130 households, which is an increase on about 90 households this time last year. So post-COVID, we're seeing a massive rise across the country, particularly the southeast, and some of our neighbours, very near neighbours, have had even more significant uplifts than that. So we're doing well. Is not the right turn of phrase, but in comparison, we're managing to keep the numbers and minimise the numbers, but they are rising. As members will appreciate, there's a massive range of factors that contribute to homelessness, not least things such as a rising housing market, still rising, I think, last time I checked, and the cost of living crisis, as it's being termed, which members will be. I won't rehash those facts now because people will be aware of that, and the impact on household incomes and then onto ability to manage afford accommodation should be obvious, I'm sure.
Yeah, very worrying. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The issue I want to address, Joe, is we've always struggled to find accommodation, enough temporary accommodation for our residents. In the last 3 weeks, 3 residents in my ward have been told their rents have been increased by £200 a month. 2 of them have given up their tenancies, are fortunate enough they can go back home. One young chap said, well, I'll just keep paying the current rate. Won't pay the other 200 because I can't afford it, and if they evict me, they evict me. So I'm really worried over the next 6 months there could be a surge in evictions or people needing housing, and it's been spiked by what's happening in the markets, but it could have an impact on Rotherham over the next 6 months, I think.
Yeah, thoughts on that one, Joe, or are you pretty well?
Well, only that we've been projecting this impact for some time, and we're doing what we can to try and ready ourselves and prepare ourselves for it. But it's a very challenging environment in which to operate, and it's for the reasons Councillor Clark-Gillis demonstrates that we're already seeing that rise post COVID, and the restrictions on eviction that were in place under COVID-19 stored up quite a lot of these challenges, and we're now realising them.
Councillor Barnes and then Councillor Cortell.
I think I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate Joe on the scheme for bringing accommodation into temporary use on lease to this council. Charlie will remember that on the Housing Task Force, we talked about the possibility of tackling a double problem, the need to combat loneliness among the old by encouraging them to buddy up. But people don't necessarily want to give up their house. So if they can actually lease it to us as when we use it as temporary accommodation, that enables them to buddy up without hitting themselves financially. I think given the current situation, that sort of thing should be pushed. In general, I thought there are one or two places where I think the language is slightly infelicitous, but the basic idea of standardising the rules across the county seemed to be very sensible indeed. We tend to think of all the criteria as being equally beneficial. I have to say I think some are more equal than others, to quote George Orwell. The two that I think we need to be particularly careful to give high priority to are those where employment will be affected, because the thing we know about people's health and well-being is jobs actually are the key foundation. So I think we should give continuity of employment where we can very high priority. The other, it's always disruptive to move school, but the one thing that is absolutely fatal is to move school during an examination year. I think that is caught in 7, but again, it's a particular concern because if you do badly in your examination year, that can have quite dramatic impact on the rest of your life. And so employment and examination years, I think, should rank pretty high, probably highest of all, when we're actually looking at the people to give most priority to.
I think that's on page 69 in criteria for prioritising placements. One of them is examination during the school year, GCSEs, A-levels or equivalent. So I think it's covered there. Who else? Councillor Cortez.
Yes, but we're tending to give equal priority to people with a healthcare plan for education. But they, of course, are usually taken to a special school by car. They're not really in the same position as those who might forfeit their job or have their examination year disrupted.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions for Joe. My apology. Are there any downsides to moving from our own policy to moving to a standard policy for East Sussex? Is there anywhere where we had an improved policy compared to the one that we are now, that you are now recommending? Now, that's my first question.
Did you get that, Joe? I think basically the question was, is this policy better than the one we've had before? Or was ours better than this one? I would like to think that this one is better.
Yeah, I think it is. It's essentially applying. There was a code of guidance refresh in 2018, 2019 to accompany the new Homelessness Reduction Act, and we have been adopting much of what is in this policy formally written down for some time, but it was really as much an exercise of getting it into order and making sure that it was reflective of active policy across the 5 districts and boroughs. But to assure members, this is a best practice policy, and it's, but in the case of Rother, so speaking for Rother, it hasn't improved or affected what we were doing in any great measure, really, in any case, because we were adopting much of this. It's just ironed out a few inconsistencies. As I say, I can't speak for other districts and boroughs. They may well have had to overhaul some of their policies and processes to a greater degree. But we've essentially, this is largely reflective of what we've been doing and follows the legislative requirements.
I think the answer is good.
Yes, thank you.
And you had another question?
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, my second question relates to the fallout in terms of the expected level of evictions due to the cost of living and people not being able to pay their rent, which could flow into an increase in rough sleeping. And I'd like to ask whether you might be willing to produce a report, produce some statistics on the number of rough sleepers in Rother on a monthly basis, and let the Overview and Scrutiny Committee have these when we look at performance and so on. And I'm not suggesting they should be related to performance. I'm just suggesting a regular statistic for the information of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And perhaps I'm looking at 3 numbers: the overall number of rough sleepers in Rother, which ones have refused accommodation and are therefore rough sleepers, and the third criteria would be those who've been deemed not to be more vulnerable than a normal person when homeless, and who are therefore not accommodated because of that Department of Levelling Up criterion. So I'm looking at 3 figures on a monthly basis. Would that be acceptable to you?
Did you get that, Joe?
Is that directed at you, Chair, or myself? I mean, I would hazard. I personally wouldn't recommend having rough sleeping is an important issue, but there are many important issues. I'm not sure it should be a topic for debate at every scrutiny meeting, although I do so enjoy coming along with this exception tonight. It's really the best mechanism for the council's and Councillor Cortell has talked to me about this prior to tonight as well, so thank him for doing that as well. I'm quite happy to take Overview and Scrutiny's lead in terms of the level of transparency. We publish our data and it's published by Deluc. I'm happy to provide more granular detail to members on a routine basis. Again, in terms of debating it here, we have our quarterly performance updates. I know that is agreed through quite a stringent process annually. So really that's over to you, Chairman, in sense of this meeting. But from my point of view, I'm happy to be as open and transparent and engage in discussion on the data as I can be.
Off the top of your head, would you know what's the average of rough sleepers at any one time in Rother? Would it be 2? Would it be 10? Would it be 20? Did you have that off the top of your head?
Yeah, verified rough sleepers. So that's people that we've found on our outreach service. So it's very difficult when they go out at 4 or 5 in the morning to make sure someone is actually rough sleeping rather than appearing to rough sleep, which can be an issue, particularly when people are caught in a cycle of begging, for example. People can appear to be rough sleeping when they're not. The average at the moment is around 3. I know at the moment we have 2 verified, both of whom have been offered accommodation. But that can change, that can change over time. And our annual count, which we do a formal annual count every year, which is due on November the 11th this year, so not far away, was 4 last time, I believe, 3 or 4. So yes, we're usually around that number.
Okay. Does that sort of answer your question a bit? Because it's not sort of massive numbers. I don't want to give Joe a job every
clarify.
month.
When I said monthly, I should have said in the quarterly performance update.
I suggest a compromise because if the numbers don't significantly increase, I don't see much point in adding that. So could we ask Joe to draw our attention if there is a significant alteration in the numbers? Because that actually will be an alert to us that we ought to look without committing Joe to producing a figure every quarter, which may actually be the same quarter on quarter.
Yeah, well, I think we do have the KPIs, and there's loads of them. We just don't get them all. But if one sort of jumps, then it comes to us. So I think we've covered ourselves pretty well, haven't we? To be honest, because there's no point Joe reporting to us 3 people every month. You know, as tragic as it is, it's not. You know what I mean? Polly.
I'd like to second approval that Councillor Coleman's already proposed.
I'd just take Councillor Langlands, if you're still there, Lynn. You've got your hand up.
I'm here. It's just a quick one, Joe, if I may. Thank you, Chair. The temporary accommodation policy, yeah, actually I think it's quite good. But I was, following on from Councillor Clark, I'm interested in the fact that there doesn't seem to be anything that does actually address the current crisis and the cost of living crisis in there, because these are going to be families that don't really fit into the criteria for temporary accommodation that's within that policy. So I'm sort of slightly concerned about this group of people that might appear on the scene all of a sudden and don't actually meet the criteria. So I don't know how that works, but perhaps you can explain that to me. And the other thing I was thinking is, do we at any point approach landlords to see if we can keep people who might be just genuinely working people who can't afford their rent to join the tenant finder scheme? Do we do anything to rescue them before we get to the situation where we've got to find temporary accommodation for them?
I think the answer to that is probably yes and yes, but I'll leave it to you, Joe.
Yeah, no, we do a great deal. I mean, I don't want to sort of shoot the fox of the homelessness and strategy review that's coming forward to the next scrutiny meeting in November, I understand, where that is demonstrated, I hope, in much greater detail, the homelessness prevention activity that we take on, which is a lot. So we make great efforts. We fund various services alongside county and health and ourselves, and the Rother Tenant Finder Service. We make great efforts to get as far upstream as we refer to it as possible to get to people early, because it's more cost effective and cost efficient. The challenge is obviously that as the numbers increase, it's increasingly we're focused, as is the case across other sectors, in health and social care, for education, for example, where we find we're in a firefighting, but more of a reactive state increasingly, which is challenging. But we still do have a strong prevention offer in Rother. I hope that answers both questions, really. I mean,
It
I
does.
think
Yeah,
in terms of temporary accommodation and for working families, we've seen a significant increase over a number of years now.
We're particularly seeing it at the food bank, I've got to say. You know, you realise that they're working and they still can't afford to feed themselves. So, you know, in this current crisis, so fairly desperate, really.
I think Joe might have frozen.
I think he I've shocked him.
I think, well, that's a good movement to be. We've had it moved by Councillor Conway, it's seconded by Councillor Gray. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item is. Let me see.
Yep. Can I say it's good to see that Parliament is not paralysed and this legislation is now going through. It seems to me that this is absolutely straightforward. We need to adopt a complaints procedure that accords with the legislation. Can I propose, therefore, that we adopt this recommendation?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Seconder, Councillor Mooney. Joe, anything to add? Or you
Not really. I hope sorry to lose you there before. I hope that the paper is self-explanatory, as Councillor Barnes has put it. It's a statutory requirement. It's something we're very keen to adopt and have already, again, in practice, we've been following a lot of these principles since acquiring our first properties, and we have surveyed our tenants in any event and had good responses. Very few in number at the moment, but an important piece of legislation and one we're very we're obliged to participate in, but very keen to.
Good. Well, that's been moved by Councillor Barnes, seconded by Councillor Mooney. All those in favour? That's good. That's carried. Thank you very much. Right, last one, agenda item 8. You'll see on there. Thanks, Joe. You'll see on there the 18th of the 10 Town Hall Renaissance project, which was going to be tomorrow, but then it was going to be next Monday, but now it's not going to be at all because at the moment there's no planning permission, there's no money to go forward with planning permission, I understand. So at the moment there's possibly no project. Now I know Councillor Cortell wanted to raise it, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I gather the decision to cancel next Monday's meeting was taken by the Chief Executive just 35 minutes after the vote and when the Planning Committee was still in session. I'm wondering what constitutional authority the Chief Executive had to override a unanimous decision by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Planning rejected a particular design proposal. Now, what we were going to consider at our next overview, at our special Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, was the feedback over a 6-week period of public consultation on all aspects of this project, be it design, be it environmental, be it financial. And because one design has been thrown out, it doesn't mean that the project is dead. So I'm just inquiring whether I'm proposing that we reinstate next Monday's meeting.
Well, I think the point of the meeting for overview and scrutiny was to make recommendations to Cabinet and Council as to whether or not the project should continue. So the fundamental reason for having the meeting was to enable this committee to make those recommendations up. Unfortunately, the decision of the Planning Committee did not go in the favour of the proposal. That is what it is. That was the prerogative of the committee to make those considerations. Unfortunately, the project has no money left to further develop the scheme to employ professionals to further the design or rework the design. So until either we can release more funding into the project to do that, there's not really a project at this stage. So what we will be doing as officers will be meeting with the leader and cabinet members to determine whether or not there's an appetite on the part of the executive for us to bring forward further proposals. And as soon as we've had those meetings and determined those options, we'll be looking to bring them through the right processes. One of those options may be to release further capital into the project to allow us to go back to planning and go back through that process. That may or may not be the case, so I can't say at this stage. But there seems little point in sort of reviewing the public perception of a scheme that may or may not go ahead. I think if it does, then it's right that it comes back to this committee and we review we review the feedback, and that will of course be the case. It wouldn't be lost work. But if there's a significant change in the proposal, then the feedback from the members of the public comes a bit redundant at that point, and we'd have to sort of redo the consultation based on whatever proposal comes forward next.
I think from my point of view, the disappointing thing is that we've only ever had, or I've only ever seen the full works, if you like. I get that we need to, improve the thermal efficiency of this building and everything else, and tidy stuff up and sort of disabled access. I think there's probably only 5 or 6 offices in the whole building that can take a disabled person free. One of them's probably yours.
It is.
So for disabled access workings and everything else, we're sort of in trouble, if you like. But from my point of view, all I've ever seen is the full 9 yards, the major job. I haven't seen a sort of a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. I've just seen plan A, take it or leave it almost, and that's sort of fell over. So that's the sort of concern I've had, because I wouldn't know if there was a B option, which you think, oh, that could be good, and it's a bit less money, and it might do this, but we don't know. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I recognise that Mr. Hook is in an almost impossible position, but I have to say it is for the committee to decide whether they want to discuss it or not for the chief executive. And I take it from what I know that you weren't consulted even, which really seems to me improper. I'm sorry. It is for Ben to make the point that our discussion might be premature is fine. But for a unilateral decision to be taken by an officer to overrule a recommendation of the committee about its own business, I think is improper. And I'm sorry to have to say that, but I think it is quite wrong. In terms of whether it is useful to have a meeting or not, the question really is, would we have ideas to feed in the light of the consultation, which might actually advance the project, suggest alternatives to it? That is one of the functions of this committee. It does not simply exist to look at a scheme and make recommendations. Part of us is about future policy. If money is short, do we allow the best to be the enemy of the good, or do we find an alternative way for actually repairing this building and actually improving it from the climate change point of view? Clearly, there are major problems with the office accommodation. Are there ways that we can meet that which would actually help our officers, given that if the money is not there for an ambitious project, then clearly, how long are we going to have to wait? That involves looking at the medium-term financial strategy. And I'm quite prepared to be realistic about this, but it seems to me that we are being frozen out of what is going to be quite an important issue for the next administration.
you want to come in, Ben?
I think it's really important to note that whatever happens next, obviously this committee will be a key part of that decision making, as you have been in the key part of the decision making for the town hall proposal as was. I think where, as officers, we stand at the moment is that without that project going forward and without the funding to sort of go back and rework the existing project, we have to sort of we need that time to sit down and work out what on earth the options are, because I think it's been 4 years now, not quite, maybe 3 years since we proposed the original. I think there were 4 or 5 options that were put in front of members at that time. In order to bring together a report that reviews those, it will need time. It will need officer time to do that. So I think your point is well made that this committee has an important role to play in that. I think holding a meeting next week based on a report that assumed that the planning permission was going to go through, and I think based on where the project team had got to on the advice of the planning department, I think that was a right assumption. That the work that had gone in over a period of sort of 18 to 24 months in the development of that scheme, the review of the options, I think the project team rightly felt that was likely to happen. That was the most likely outcome, and therefore the report was based on that outcome. I think to progress with that specific report, given that the planning permission hasn't been granted, I think throws the options up into the air. And I think just looking at the one approach, which is, hey, we've got planning permission, should we recommend this scheme for approval or not, is one of what will be many options that will need to be reviewed. And I think it's only right that we go back and do an assessment of what those options are before bringing it to the committee for discussion.
Councillor Coleman, are you lamenting the loss of your vegan calf?
I wasn't going to mention that. I think Ben's actually covered most of what I was going to say. It's just that if this was cancelling that meeting in order to try and somehow sort of surpass scrutiny and go above us in some way, then I'd agree with Councillor Barnes and Cortell. But I think to me it read as very much a sort of soft reschedule of that meeting to if and when officers have worked out what the next steps are. And I think just a commitment from Ben that it will come back to scrutiny if there is something to come back to scrutiny when it's ready to. I think that's hopefully satisfies everybody.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I think to sort of agree with Councillor Barnes, it would have been nice as chairman. It might have been nice to have been asked. Whether I'm getting a public station, I don't know, but it'd been nice to have asked. And to be honest, I would have agreed with the chief executive, because as far as I see it, as we said earlier, there's at the moment there's no scheme, there's no made progressive, so it's sort of floundering a bit. But until it sort of picks itself up and jumps back in the water, then we need to know again, don't we? That's the way I look at it. Well, you won't agree, Councillor Cortell.
I don't agree, I'm afraid. I feel that it's been done back to front. I feel that we should have had the scrutiny committee meeting first, which would have looked at the whole project holistically, and we may have wanted to suggest changes to the planning proposal, which might have ended up in the planning permission going through.
Yeah, but I think we've sort of discussed that before. We're not the planning committee, are we? I think on design, we're not the planning committee, because we could come up, 16 of us or whatever many there is, could come up with completely different.
We may not be the planning committee, but we need to look at proposals as the applicant and consider feedback from our residents. And we've asked them to participate in a consultation which is now binned. And I feel that is wrong in principle.
I suppose to a degree any consultation would be redone, because if there's a new application, then it go through the new process, and there'd be more chance for people to talk again. So,
feeding into the initial applications entirely being left to one officer. That's my feeling.
I'd like to propose an option. I mean, what I can do is, separate from the committee, and send it to all members, is pull together the outcomes of the consultation, so that actually all members have an opportunity to understand what the feeling of people, those people who engaged in the consultation felt, and that then might feed into decision making going forward as people are aware. I would, it's important that I think that consultation is looked at, and I think people's opinions were listened to. So I'm happy to do that, sort of rather than having a full scrutiny meeting to go through it. Share that with members, all 38 members, to help inform decision making going forward.
I think that would be very helpful. I'm grateful to Mr. Hook for that. I do think the lesson to be learned is it's one thing to say to the chairman of the committee, this meeting now looks to be redundant and should at least be postponed. It's another, I think, really to bypass the chairman of the committee. And I do think a lesson needs to be learned there.
Put my machine on. Back to the work programme, 21st of the 11th of November, 21st of November. When we want to talk about swimming pool closures, wasn't it? We've already moved.
Yeah, I think we've already moved and resolved that we're going to invite. We will invite Freedom Leisure to come and talk about it. I think if they are unable to come on that date, we'll consult with you, Chairman, about how we best present it.
Okie dokie. But the rest of it we're happy with at the moment.
Point of order,
Chairman. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I think Ben knows what I'm going to say. The environment strategy, we agreed to 6-monthly reviews. According to my notes, the last review was the 25th of April. So we're pretty much due for one. Could we look at that, please?
October.
This month, Ben.
That's fine. Yeah, we'll. What dates? There's a meeting. When's the? What dates have we got? We've got. Oh, it's a pain, isn't it? It'd be either January or November, wouldn't it?
January would be 9 months.
See what comes out. We've got there is a climate change steering group meeting tomorrow.
There is.
So maybe we can ask.
I think there's some bits that we can pull together for a report for November if members are happy with that. I mean, I'm just conscious that we have got quite a lot on November and January and March. So do a brief. If it's a brief update, and I can try and arrange that ready for November.
All right. Well, with that, I see people are itching to move, and I'm not surprised. It's 8:43. Meeting closed. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.